You've probably heard that people are either left-brained or right-brained, meaning that they think and learn in different ways. And if you know someone who's left-brained, it might explain why they seem so logical and unemotional. But is this actually true? This is a surprisingly controversial topic, but most neuroscientists agree that it's not. There is no part of the brain that is dedicated to logic or language or any other single function. And even though some of us are better at math or music or making decisions, these skills don't come from one side of the brain. They come from the complex interplay between both sides working together. That means there's no such thing as a left-brained person or a right-brained person. But why did this myth start, and why do so many people still believe it? It starts with one of the earliest and most influential brain researchers. In the 1960s, Roger Sperry was trying to figure out what each hemisphere does. And since you can't ask the brain what it's thinking, he did the next best thing. He studied patients who had their corpus callosum severed, which is the bundle of neurons that connects the two hemispheres. Sperry found that severing this connection could relieve symptoms of severe epilepsy. So it seemed like each hemisphere was doing its own thing and didn't need the other to function. But that wasn't the whole picture. It turned out that the two hemispheres were still communicating, just not as efficiently. If a patient saw something in their left visual field, for example, they could still describe it even though half of their brain wasn't processing the information. They were relying on what's called subcortical communication, meaning that signals were being sent through parts of the brain below the cortex and outside of the corpus callosum. Now we know that both hemispheres work together whether or not they have a corpus callosum. Each hemisphere has most of the same structures and can perform most of the same functions, like language, logic, and creativity. Sure, some of us are better at some things than others, but that comes down to differences in how our brains are connected, not which side is dominant. For example, most of us are better at processing faces in the right hemisphere, but that doesn't mean the right hemisphere is more creative. It just means that the right hemisphere has more connections to the back of the brain, where visual processing happens. So where does this left brain, right brain stuff come from? Now that we know it's not true, well, it's a great example of the narrative fallacy. We naturally impose order on things, even when there isn't any. When Sperry started his research, he was looking for a simple answer to a complex question, and he found one in the differences between the left and right hemispheres. That framing made sense at the time, and it stuck. Even as new research painted a more complicated picture. That's not uncommon in science. Theories evolve as new evidence comes to light, and sometimes the new evidence doesn't fit the story we've already told ourselves. But we tend to hold on to those stories because they help us make sense of the world. Like if all of humanity's problems could be solved by just giving everyone a hug, then the world would be a much simpler place. And while that sounds nice, it's just not true. So what can we do with this knowledge that there is no such thing as a left-brained person? For starters, we can stop labeling people based on their strengths. One study found that when people were told they had a certain strength, like being detail-oriented, they took less time to complete tasks that required focus and more time on tasks that required creativity. Basically, they conformed to the stereotype. And we can apply this to ourselves by recognizing that we rate good at a lot more than we think. It turns out that almost everything we do requires both sides of the brain. So if you're bad at something, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You just need to find ways to use your strengths to compensate. If you're a people person but hate paperwork, maybe you should hire an assistant. If you're really artistic but can't draw, maybe you should take up sculpting. The point is, we shouldn't let stereotypes limit us. Just because something isn't natural doesn't mean it's impossible. So the next time you meet a stranger, don't try to figure out if they're left-brained or right-brained. Ask them about what they like to do and how they do it. Because however they answer, they'll be using both sides of their brain, just like you. Thanks for watching this episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care. See you again.